Welcome to Prison Rule News Weekly, Episode 2. This is a series bringing you the latest crime and prison news from around the world. The headlines for this week: hackers uncover systemic abuse in Iranian prisons, a police group calls for the release of a cop killer, a former policeman is sentenced to 25 years, a man who has served 20 years for burning his own mother alive may be innocent, and a corrupt police chief is on the run for a torture that went too far. Be sure to stay tuned in for the above and more. Video clips from the notorious Evin prison in Tehran, Iran, after hackers breached the prison's CCTV system. The harrowing footage, which showed beatings, sexual violence, neglect and overcrowding, provided a rare glimpse of cruelty against prisoners, Amnesty said. The footage prompted a rare apology from the head of Iran's prison system, Mohammed Mehdi Haj Mohammadi, who wrote on Twitter on Tuesday that he took responsibility for the unacceptable behaviour in the videos. Mohammadi added that he was committed to try to prevent any repeats of these bitter events and to deal seriously with wrongdoers. However, the prison official also said he appreciated the effort of Iran's honourable prison guards, which suggested, according to Amnesty International, that the brutal scenes witnessed in the footage are the work of a bad few. Torture and other ill treatment are far too widespread and systemic in Iran's prisons, and detention centres to be presented as the work of a few bad apples, said Hiba Morayev, Middle East and North African Regional Director at Amnesty International. Brief apologies and general promises of accountability are far from enough to address Iran's crisis of systemic impunity. Of the 16 video clips reviewed by Amnesty, 7 showed prison guards beating and or ill-treating prisoners, 3 of them showed overcrowded prison rooms, 3 showed inmates assaulting other inmates, 2 showed inmates self-harming, and 1 showed a solitary cell. They are dated from 2015 to 2021. One clip from April of this year showed a frail prisoner being dragged semi-conscious while other prison staff stood around watching. A coalition of current and retired black police officers is calling for the release on parole of Sundiata Acoli, a former Black Panther member who had been incarcerated for 48 years for the 1973 murder of a New Jersey state trooper. 4 black law enforcement groups have joined forces to press the case for Acoli's parole almost half a century after he was arrested. In an amicus brief filed with the New Jersey Supreme Court, they called his continued imprisonment an affront to racial justice and accused the parole board of violating the law by repeatedly refusing to set the prisoner free. Mr. Acoli has spent more than half his life in prison cells the size of parking spaces, including nearly 20 years as a senior citizen. He should be granted parole, the group wrote. Acoli is one of at least 11 former members of the Black Panther Party and its armed wing, the Black Liberation Army, who are still imprisoned for acts of violence committed largely in the 1960s and 70s. Many of the prisoners are approaching their half-century behind bars. At 84, Acoli is the oldest of the former black radicals, still languishing in prison. He contracted COVID-19 last year from his cell in FCI Cumberland in Maryland and is suffering from physical and mental impairments, including gradual deterioration of his memory. In a written communication with The Guardian, Acoli said he was struggling with chronic degeneration of his hearing, eyesight, and mental and muscular capacity, yet was receiving little or no medical treatment in prison. In the amicus brief, the 4 black police officer groups made powerful arguments against Acoli's continuing imprisonment. They point out that New Jersey has the greatest disparity in the nation between incarceration rates of black and white people, a gap of 12 to 1, according to the state's Criminal Sentencing and Disposition Commission. Almost 2/3 of New Jersey prisoners serving life sentences are black. They also point out that prisoners on life sentences like Acoli tend to have the lowest recidivism rate of all classes of prisoner, and the rate falls further with age. Yet over the past 40 years, the rate of prisoners granted release by the New Jersey Parole Board had plummeted from 42% in the 1980s to just 7% between 2012 and 2019. The black groups accuse the parole board of obsessively focusing on whether Acoli has changed his radical political views rather than concentrating on the only issue they are required to consider, whether he poses a threat to the public should he be freed. The amicus brief says the board's approach amounts to extra-legal punishment. Okoli first came up for parole in 1993 and on that occasion was not only denied but told he would have to wait another 20 years before he could reapply to the board. In 2014, he came close to walking free when a 3-judge panel of the State Appeals Court ordered his release on grounds he posed no threat at all, only to have that ruling overturned by the state Supreme Court. After a further round of parole board and court hearings, he's now appealing again to the New Jersey Supreme Court. Ronald Hampton, who served for 24 years as a police officer in Washington, D.C., and who is now with Blacks in Law Enforcement of America, said that prolonged prison terms for the former Black Panthers highlighted racial distortions in the criminal justice system. These long sentences are absurd. The system is meant to rehabilitate. Prisoners who complete their sentences should be sent home, but that hasn't worked for the black folks. A judge has sentenced the former Alabama police officer to 25 years in prison for the shooting of a suicidal man to death who was holding a gun to his own head. Former Huntsville police officer William Ben Darby was convicted in May of killing Jeffrey Parker in 2018. Darby shot Parker while responding to a call after the man phoned 911, saying he was armed and planned to kill himself. Darby and the others pleaded for leniency, saying there was no evil intent when he pulled the trigger. Prosecutors argued during the sentencing that Darby's lack of willingness to admit wrongdoing and the gravity of what he did to Jeffrey Parker deserved a long sentence, news outlets reported. Jeff was in a mental state. Jeff had issues. Jeff asked for help, Bill Parks, Jeff Parker's best friend, told reporters. Parks said another officer had the situation under control until Darby entered and shot Parker within seconds. During the trial, jurors saw video of the shooting taken from police body cameras, and Darby testified that he had feared seeing one of my officers getting hurt and fired after Parker only shrugged when ordered to put down the gun he was holding to his own head. Speaking on his own behalf, Darby said he was haunted by the shooting. The case drew additional controversy when Darby was allowed to remain on the city payroll for 2 months after his conviction. The guilty verdict was criticised by both the mayor and police chief, but lauded by the victim's family, who said they hope it will spur law enforcement to change how they approach mental health crises. An innocent man was murdered, prosecutor Tim Gann told jurors in closing arguments this spring. He called for help and he got Ben Darby. 2 groups that work to overturn wrongful convictions argued in a petition filed Monday that a Missouri man who has spent more than 20 years in prison for killing his mother did not commit the crime. Michael Polite was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison in 2002. He was 14 when his mother, Rita Polite, was burned to death inside their home in Hopewell in eastern Missouri in 1998. The Midwest Innocence Project and the MacArthur Justice Center, along with attorneys from the Langdon and Emission law firm in Lexington, argue in the petition filed with the Missouri Court of Appeals Western District that Polite was convicted because of a biased investigation, faulty science, and an incompetent defense at trial. They asked the court to release Polite from custody, conduct an evidentiary hearing, or appoint a special master to investigate his case. How did I end up in prison? Because this judicial system is overseen by flawed human beings who don't want to admit that they got anything wrong? They don't want to admit that they wrongfully convicted a 14-year-old for murdering his own mother, Polite said in a statement released by his attorneys. Mike Polite and a friend were sleeping at the mobile home when they both awoke to smoke early on December 5, 1998, according to the petition. Michael told authorities he found his mother's burning body in her bedroom as he and his friend tried to escape. He also suffered blunt force trauma to her head. The petition alleges fire investigators quickly decided the fire was started with gasoline, and police immediately zeroed in on her son as a suspect, although no blood or other injuries were found on him. Investigators also said he didn't show much emotion or remorse in the days following his mother's death. Law enforcement did not investigate other viable suspects, including Polite's father, recently divorced from Rita Polite, who had been ordered to pay a significant financial settlement the week before she died. Witnesses also said a cousin of Polite's father was seen around the mobile home shortly after the fire was reported. Tunnel vision set in quickly, which appears in most cases of wrongful conviction, said Megan Crane, co-director of the MacArthur Justice Center. Once they decided on Michael, the investigation was fatally undermined from that point on. Throughout frequent interrogation without an attorney in the 48 hours after his mother's death, Polite steadfastly maintained his innocence, as he has in the intervening years, Crane said. Before he went to trial, Polite rejected an offer to plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter because he was innocent, she said. The friend, who was at the scene, has consistently backed Polite's story, and Polite's two sisters have always believed he is innocent, Crane said. Polite was held in juvenile custody for 4 years before he was tried as an adult in January 2002. The state did not provide a motive for Polite to kill his mother, and its case rested largely on testimony from fire investigators who said the fire was started by an accelerant and that Polite had gas on his shoes, the only physical evidence linking him to the killing. Those findings were based on fire investigation techniques that have since been discredited, and the state has conceded in the intervening years that Polite did not have gas on his shoes, according to the petition, and that Polite had gas on his shoes, the only physical evidence linking him to the killing. Those findings were based on fire investigation techniques that have since been discredited, and the state has conceded in the intervening years that Polite did not have gas on his shoes, according to the petition. During the trial, Polite's attorney presented only half a day of testimony from 3 witnesses. No experts were called to debunk the fire and gasoline evidence, or to refute the state's argument that Polite did not show any remorse about his mother's death. Polite's friend was not called, and the attorney persuaded Polite not to testify. Investigators in Thailand are hunting for a now sacked police chief after a video went viral showing the apparent torture and killing of a drug suspect. Police searched the Bangkok luxury estate of Titisan Utanhapon, widely known by the nickname Joe Ferrari. He and 6 others are accused over the fatal incident earlier this month. CCTV footage posted online appears to show the suspect being ordered to pay $60,000 to have charges dropped before he is suffocated with a plastic bag. On Wednesday, a search of the police chief's mansion in Bangkok revealed 13 luxury cars. A day earlier, Mr. Thitisan, 39, was sacked as a police superintendent after the video caused outrage. The footage, which was reportedly posted by a junior officer, shows several policemen wrapping plastic bags around the head of a man who had been arrested for selling methamphetamine pills. According to local reports, the torture occurred after the suspect was told to double a bribe that had been agreed to be released and that of his girlfriend. The video shows attempts to revive the man, but he died from suffocation. The officer allegedly told subordinates to list the cause of death as a drug overdose. That's all for this week. If you enjoyed the week's episode, please subscribe and leave us a like. If you missed last week's episode, it's on the screen now. Until next week.